Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the FP&A Trends Webinar. I'm very excited to say we have 360 registrants in 46 countries around the world. Truly FP&A global thought leadership. I'm also very excited about the topic, building a world-class FP&A team. And specifically, we're going to talk about what are those 5 critical roles and even push a little beyond that to say, what can we do to have that world-class team? Our agenda for today. So we're going to start with the skills of the future, really embracing the future and saying, how can FP&A lead the way? We'll talk about the 5 critical roles. We'll define them. And then, as I said, we'll push a little beyond that to say, what about that role as a connector, which is an adjacent role there? We'll talk about how do you actually embrace change and actually start to enjoy change in order to be at the cutting edge and really to deliver world-class results. We'll do some conclusion, some recommendations, and one of my favorite parts of the webinar is always the Q&A. So please submit your questions via the question box, and we commit to answering as many as we can in person, but we will submit written questions to anything that was not answered. I'm now going to invite my panel to join me on camera. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to start with Natasha Rathi, who's currently the SVP Head of Finance at BlueRock Therapeutics, a subsidiary of Bayer. She's based out of Toronto, Canada, and she's actually got many functional experiences, as you see, and 2 decades in life sciences, consumer packaged goods, Kraft and Pepsi, financial, and fintech. So Natasha, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks, Ron.
Okay, next I have Garrett Deeney, who's also in Toronto, Canada. Lots of fantastic retail experience. You can see very passionate about successfully creating and transforming small and large teams. And he's currently the CFO of Knix. Garrett, welcome.
Glad to be here, Ron, thanks.
Fantastic. And last but not least, so Tiffany Little in Texas in the United States. So a ton of experience, really passionate about finding those patterns, insights, and I love her perspective on change, which she will share. She's currently the Global Reporting Manager at City Electric Supply. Tiffany, welcome.
Thank you so much, Ron.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, panel. I will invite you back a little later in the webinar. Thank you. Okay, I want to take a minute to thank our sponsor, so Board International. Reach your goals and drive digital transformation across your organization. So thank you, Board, for making this webinar happen. I'm always impressed with this slide. 32 cities, 18 countries, 4 continents. So great that we're doing global thought leadership. And I congratulate Larissa and the rest of the FP&A Trends team for continuing to build that global thought leadership. If you look at the middle of the page, FP&A Insights, so the Trends magazine with 450,000 readers, best practice webinars like this, a LinkedIn group with 42,000 members, and the Trends Digest, which is also, again, cutting edge articles in order to stay ahead of the curve. On the right side of the page, you see best practice workshops, you see FP&A consultancy, artificial intelligence, machine learning, so really powerful in terms of that thought leadership. A few housekeeping items. So we're going to do a one-hour webinar. We're going to do 2 polls, and we always encourage participation in those polls, right? It always helps our job as panelists to direct our thoughts and feedback towards your specific feedback. We're going to have that interactive Q&A session that I talked about. Please use that chat box. And we will make this presentation and the handouts available, including the recording. And we really appreciate you taking time to complete the survey. It's really important for us to continue to make these webinars as powerful and as useful for you in order to move forward. So thank you in advance for completing the survey. So before I turn to my panel, I'm going to share my thoughts in terms of building that best-in-class team. And I spent many years, almost 20 years in FP&A, and this webinar would have been very powerful for me in terms of intentionally building that FP&A team. So let me start with our survey. So 2023 survey, and you can see over the last 3 years, the red and the orange boxes, 45% of time spent on low value activities. And if you look at the right side of the page, those high value activities of insight generation and driving actions, only 34%. So I think this is a, glass half full would be, we have lots of opportunity to grow. And I think this webinar specifically on how we craft our teams can really make a meaningful difference as we look at 2024 and beyond. So really excited to share this knowledge. We're going to talk about talent and roles for the most part, but what I wanted to start with is creating a dynastic FP&A team. So an FP&A team that has a huge impact on the business, has a great culture for many years to come. So what's important in that? Developing a very clear and intentional culture, authentic and consistent leadership, talent and roles, which we'll spend a lot of time talking about, ownership. So ownership and healthy conflict, that's really around, do we create that psychological safety where we can embrace frank and open discussions in the spirit of growth? And last but not least, innovation, right? So this particular webinar talks about a very different approach to building that FP&A team and really taking advantage of trends that we're seeing in the industry. And for some fun, some sports teams, Chicago, the Oilers, New England, and Barcelona, my favorite team. But again, it's just a nice little way to say a business team can be very similar to a sports team where you're creating that dynasty for the future. So here are the 5 roles, right? So the analyst, the influencer, the storyteller, very familiar to me, right? They will continue to be super important. Where we're going a little deeper on today is the architect, the data scientist, right? And these are really important bridge roles that if we take a proactive approach can be super powerful. So that's where I say I want to spend a little bit more time on the data scientist and the architect, whereas the analyst continues to be a really powerful role, but it's made that much stronger if we invest that time in the data scientist and architect approach. So let me start with the data scientist, right? So it's really the bridge between the finance and data science functions. And you know how much data we're getting at it. It's exponentially growing. So they should be skilled in predictive technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, uncovering key analytical drivers and trends, right? How do we incorporate the AI into our statistical modeling? How do we be extremely familiar with master data management? So again, that's a really special skill set to say, how do we bridge between finance and the data science functions? And similarly, another bridge between the finance and IT functions. And again, in a lot of my history, IT and finance were a lot of times speaking different languages. So imagine if we could be on the same page and how much faster and more powerful we could be if we have that role within finance, where you understand both the IT side and the FP&A side. So connecting IT finance strategy, developing the architecture, harmonizing those processes, driver-based, really being in touch with that, and also being involved in the data warehouse development. So again, powerful roles that again can really help get the data for the analyst, as we talked about, and then the influencing and storytelling can be that much more powerful. So I'm really excited to say, hey, if we're at the cutting edge, we focus on all 5 of those roles. What we're going to do is we're going to share this deck, and you'll see the paper which incorporates some of this. So again, lots of great knowledge here that you can implement on your respective teams. So with that being said, I'm really excited to have Natasha share her approach to the 5 rules. Natasha, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Ron. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for the intro. I thought I would break down our conversation into 3 different areas, and that is the trends that have been at the forefront for me within FP&A over the years, my thoughts on the 5 critical roles that Ron, you just took us through, and then a very practical approach to building FP&A teams that have worked for me in the past, and I'm hoping it will be helpful for those on the call today. As I reflect back to when I first started in FP&A, and that was over 2 decades ago, the approaches that were taken at the time as we analyzed our company's performance were very simplistic approaches, although at the time I didn't really think they were simplistic at the time. It was solely backward-looking, really only analyzed historical information, and I feel then FP&A was really seen as number crunchers. We dealt with the transactions, explained month end, and put P&Ls together. When it came to strategic planning, FP&A didn't really have a seat at the table as they do today. And we may have racked up the numbers and consolidated numbers, but we weren't actively involved in these discussions on strategy. And as far as performance management, we were the group that really had the information and the data, gathered the opportunities and risks, but really had little, I would say, influence over strategic decisions that would improve performance. So those working in FP&A in the field now, many on this call, know how far we've come and advanced as a function over the last 20 years. So if we take a look at what has changed over this period, there have been a lot of trends over time, but the three that really stuck with me are technology, being that strategic business partner, and then risk management or scenario planning. For the first one, it goes without saying that technology has changed rapidly with ERP systems, reporting systems that can do more than ever before. Not only can we do financial close much faster, but we have real-time data on performance throughout the month. Depending on your investments within the technologies, some companies have brought in AI and predictive analytics and dynamic dashboards, as well as storytelling features, which is my last role as well. We did a lot of that. And all of these features have really improved the way that we could budget. For the company that I work for, our parent company, we are actually moving towards a more agile approach to budgeting because of these advancements. Our company is focused more on reducing the actual number of hours across the entire enterprise that's taken up with planning, because we do recognize that planning is a big time suck away from critical R&D or commercial roles, because budgeting really doesn't do anything to enhance the consumer or the patient experience in our case. The second one is strategic partnering. This one is related to the first trend around technology, because as we become more efficient, we have access to more and better data that is automated. The ability to bring out these valuable nuggets of what the data means has enhanced, I would say, the business value that our function has brought. And now companies are seeking input from FP&A teams. And so now we do have a seat at the table to make strategic decisions alongside the CEO and other various functions. Depending on what type of industry you're in, finance is actually leading some of these discussions, which is great because it requires different skill sets around communicating, collaboration skills, as well as strong EQ or emotional intelligence. The last one is risk management, and many industries have seen over the last few years that with the pandemic, and even now as we recover from the pandemic, there is more uncertainty in the business environment around us. And so FP&A functions are playing a greater emphasis on strategic planning and sensitivity analysis, for example. Within our industry, within life sciences, global supply chain disruptions is the biggest example I can think of as well. Within the pharma industry, it's very important that we understand the manufacturing of important prescription drugs and all the inputs required to do that, and then work with healthcare regulatories to ensure that we have the right possible alternatives in case of shortages. So I've reflected on the 5 critical roles that exist on an FP&A team that Ron took us through. And I'll only call out a few of my observations here. The first one is these roles really highly depend on the size and stage of company that you're in. So I'm currently in a startup biotech. We have a very small FP&A team of only a few people. And when you're in startup, you're really focused on just getting the data right through the systems. And only now are we really building the right reporting to analyze the data. So we are quite nascent on the definitions of these roles on our team. The other thing I'll call out is that each person on this team is not a unique role as you see it here. So I'll give you an example. You may have only a few people on the team, but you do need to cover off the value eventually generated from each of these roles that we heard earlier. So at times I may play the data scientist or the analyst role, but then I have to quickly switch gears and be that storyteller or the influencer when it comes to partnering with my stakeholders, depending on who I'm obviously dealing with within the organization. And then lastly, the skill sets of these roles are quite different from one another and require deliberate effort to build. For example, I've had many analysts on the team in the past who've had to work hard to build that muscle of influence to be able to generate action and really change and improve performance. Data scientists have a very specific skill set, and universities have dedicated programs specifically in this area now, I think more than in the past. Which brings me to my last slide. And so knowing the 5 critical roles that we've covered, and it's good to know that we're getting material on this afterwards, but how do you actually build an FP&A team around those 5 critical roles? So very simply, building an FP&A team, or any team for that matter of fact, requires you to carefully assess where you are today, where you need to be, and then how quickly you need to get there. And I'm sure there are many ways to do this. These are just the steps that I found have worked for me in the past. And as you can tell, there's a pre-assessment phase where you audit the skills of your existing team, assuming it's in place, and then define the skill sets required for each of those different roles. And it's at this phase where you can actually work in those critical roles, those 5 critical roles, when you think about this. And from that point, you'll have to make a decision on whether or not you need to acquire these skills outside of your organization or build these skill sets within, depending on how much time you have to fill in these gaps. So hiring and training are obviously a big part of the key activities at this moment. I've had times in the past where I've had to bring in someone to fill in the role of an analyst because the team lacked the fundamental analytical or functional skills required to pull those insights out of the systems, which ended up leveling out the team from a skills perspective and actually created a nice career ladder as well within the team, which was great. So after this point, once the team is in place, there will be an ongoing period where there's going to be continuous learning and optimization. This is where improving processes and the ways in which you work within the team will evolve, given the tools, obviously, that you have access to. And because we know that business is dynamic and it's always changing, so should be our approaches in the way we move and evolve as an FP&A function. So that's all I had. Thank you very much, Ron, for the opportunity, and looking forward to answering some questions later that anyone may have.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Natasha. I found that super insightful. And I love how you started. Hey, we've come a long way, and it's all about are we invited to the table? You talked about, hey, evolving our approach to 90-day sprints and being super agile, which I think is a nice reframe versus traditional FP&A. And I love how you said, look, it's very situational. So you're in a startup organization, your approach might be different than a very established company. And you use the word deliberate effort, which I love, multiple hats, and even saying, look, I'm even going to universities to saying there's a skill set out there that's being developed. So I love that. And then the process is really insightful, right? Say, where are we now? And then you said, where do we need to be and how quickly, which I think was a nice add to saying, what's the urgency? How do we move forward? So really appreciate the presentation. And I look forward to your discussion answers as well as we move forward. So I love the webinar so far. I'd encourage participants to send in questions. That's always one of my favorite parts of it, right? So we've got a couple of questions, keep them coming. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna launch our first poll, and I invite you to vote on it. So I'm launching the poll. And the question is, what role and skill set would most benefit your organization? Is it the FP&A analyst, the architect, the scientist, the data scientist, the influencer, or the storyteller? And I see lots of people are voting. Keep those votes coming. Love it. So once again, what role and skill set would benefit your organization? Would most benefit your organization? Is it the analyst, the architect, the data scientist, the influencer, or the storyteller? And I'll just give it a few more seconds. So thank you. Lots of different people voting, and it's coming through. Fantastic. So I'm going to close the poll now, and I'm going to share the results. Okay, so the results are 15% with the data analyst, 20% with the architect, 26% with the data scientist, 23% with the influencer, and 16% with the storyteller. So you can see the architect, the scientist, and the influencer have a little bit more of a weighting. Okay, Natasha, I'd love your thoughts on that particular comment poll.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And obviously there's no right answer to this because the question is, what skill set would most benefit your organization? I'm assuming that there are many different types and you know, they're at different journeys as well. Data scientist is relatively a new concept. And so I wouldn't be surprised at as this being the highest or the greatest need, I would say. But yeah, it's very, very insightful, fairly even. I mean, even though a data scientist is a little bit higher, fairly even, which is the recognition that all of these roles play an important part.
Exactly. Thank you, Natasha. No, I totally agree. They're all important, but you can see situationally, I think that data scientist and architect are probably getting a little bit more focus area right now. Okay, so thank you everybody for participating in the poll. Always helpful to see how our audience is doing, and we will have another poll coming up. So at this point, I'm going to invite my panel to join me for a quick discussion. Okay, welcome panel. So our question that we're going to talk about is how can FP&A professionals accelerate their adoption of the data scientist and architect roles? And pretty cool to see that 26% was the data scientist. So Garrett, let me start with you. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to prioritizing and understanding that, FP&A depends so much on data. So you really have to prioritize that and look at that and value that in, your talent and where you're looking at strengthening your team.
Fantastic. Tiffany, what do you think?
I think it comes down to the old saying, junk in, junk out. If you do not have good enough data coming in, you're not going to be able to utilize your FP&A team to the full extent. So you do have to depend so heavily on, you have to be able to trust your data. You have to be able to trust the numbers and what they're telling you. So I completely think that if you want good FP&A, you have to have good data.
Fantastic. Natasha, what's the last word on this question?
Yeah, I would say just to add to what Garrett and Tiffany was saying, the data is important and so are the people. Who you bring in is very important. There's a lot of young talent out there that are focused on these programs in school right now, and they're very passionate. And I would say to accelerate it, just get a few new talent in, get some interns in and start the journey.
Yeah, no, I love the consistent approach there, right? And to use Tiffany's words, junk in, junk out. But it's really important to say, look, that data is foundational. And without that data, it's hard to really take advantage of the analysis, the storytelling, the influencing. So it really starts with that. And I love the approach of a very intentional, hey, we're going to get these data scientists and architects, whether it's straight out of school or professionals who've been in the working world for a long time who have that passion for it. Okay, fantastic. So we'll continue the webinar. Thank you, panelists. And what we're going to do now is we talked about the 5 roles. There's actually 2 more that we're going to add to the mix. And there's the interpreter and the connector. And again, I love Garrett's approach to saying, look, how can FP&A be that glue within the organization? We see a 360-degree view of the business. And I love his story on becoming that connector. So Garrett, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ron. As we go to my first slide, I think about my career, and my career started at a department store retailer, and that's a business that's business model that's kind of on the decline. But what we say about retail is detail, and so often adversity will help you build your FP&A skills. And so in that declining model, there is such a need for looking at things at different angles and really building your analytical muscle. And so I got early on that opportunity to really build my analytical muscle. In the same vein, we had to really influence the business and these business owners that were doing things the same way for many years with much success. Now it wasn't as successful, so we had to influence them with the analysis that we were doing and influence them to go down, different paths. And of course, to be a good influencer, you really need to be a good storyteller. And so you really had to understand, how you're going to walk your audience from point A to point B and really tell a story that was going to take them down the path you wanted them to go down. So, that opportunity early on in my career with that declining business really helped me strengthen those muscles and really set a great base in terms of those FP&A roles. As I got a little bit further up the ranks and further in my career, I really started to see importance in 2 other roles that we haven't talked about as much yet, which were interpreter and connector. Being an interpreter, there's different factions in a business. You've got your C-suite, your CEO, your CFO, and then you've got the different business functions that in FP&A you support. They both look at numbers a bit differently. They might have different priorities, and so you really had to understand what was important to both of those groups, understand how they viewed the numbers, and really make sure that you were kind of being able to talk in their language, so to speak, and interpret between the two groups, making sure that those two groups understood each other and could bring each other together on the same page. And so, interpreter really became a very valuable role in terms of FP&A and making sure the business was talking the same language and moving in the same direction. Probably one of the most important roles that I've encountered in FP&A as I grew was the role of connector. When I talk about connector, I really am talking about kind of the planning and budgeting, so to speak. And on the next slide, you'll see most organizations, when they talk planning and budgeting, they talk planning and budgeting synonymously. So it's almost like one big process. Most start around August, September timeframe for a next year starting in January. They get together, talk what their strategies are going to be, what are their targets. The financial targets are kind of come up with in parallel with the strategy discussion. Strategic initiatives to support that strategy are developed, but it's all being done at the same time. It's all being done in a very short time frame. They often forget to connect the operational execution that's necessary to achieve those results. And so you end up with a strategy that was kind of come up in isolation, maybe some financial numbers that are loosely connected to that strategy, but then that operational execution is completely disconnected. And so in FP&A, what I've seen on the next slide in best practice is we separate those two pieces. We separate the planning from the budgeting. They're two separate things. Planning is coming up with all the different initiatives that you want to do to achieve a particular aspiration or strategy, and budgeting is really fleshing out the numbers and putting the numbers together to that. And so if you separate that out and you're a little bit more proactive in your planning process, that planning phase can start kind of in February. And why just plan for next year? Maybe think about the 2 years out, 3 years out. And so in doing that planning, we're giving ourselves enough time to, you'll see, connect the operational execution that's required. We can further simplify it for the business by really taking out the pieces that aren't as much in control of the business, and I'll illustrate that a little bit later in the presentation. And then really isolating the pieces that the business can affect and plan initiatives around. And so FP&A plays an integral role in doing all of that, separating out the uncontrollable and leading the business in the planning process of their initiatives. Now that we're doing it more proactively, a couple years ahead, 3 years ahead, February instead of September for the next year, we've got more time to really think about the operational execution that's required to achieve those goals. And so once you start connecting that operational execution, you're now connecting the strategy to the operations, to the numbers, and then finally you come together at the end and you consolidate all those uncontrollable pieces that you have assumptions for and have calculated. You connect them and consolidate them with all the initiatives that the business has worked up and planned for, and that becomes the budget at the end. So it's all a continuous process throughout the year. On the next slide, as we look at the total plan, it's really split up into several different components or building blocks. The dark blue here you'll see are those more uncontrolled pieces that you really come up with some assumptions. The business has less control over them. So like your baseline business, any cost headwinds, any headwinds in general. I worked for a pharmacy organization where generic drug prices were being controlled by the government. and the prices were decreasing. That's a cost headwind that you don't have much control over, that you would really just calculate and say, okay, we need to overcome that. And then organic market growth, where the market's growing or decreasing, and your share is just going to fluctuate based on that. And then on the far right, once you're able to calculate those dark blue pieces, you can back those out of your targets and your numbers, and the residual is what you need to achieve out of your initiatives. And so, in this example, we've got sales growth initiatives, price optimization initiatives, and several different cost productivity initiatives that you would attach targets to and ask the business to plan their initiatives. So rather than worrying about this aggregated sales number that might have 5 or 6 different things rolling into it, it's much more transparent by just and simple to tell the business, hey, just plan your initiatives for this. You need to get initiatives that roll up to this dollar level, and then you consolidate it back at the back end in the budgeting process. And we'll see on my last slide here, on this last slide, the budgeting effort becomes so much less. So I've gone into organizations where they say, it's our health season. It takes 8 weeks. No one likes it. We never end up being happy with the result. And if you really do this long-range planning and connecting the operations with the numbers, with the strategy, that budgeting season really becomes 1 week. You're just consolidating the numbers. You've already done the pre-work, so it takes a lot of the stress and a lot of the work out of that budgeting season. So it's a great result there. We also prepare contingency plans as we're planning. And so as you go through a year, you've done the work on those contingency plans. You have them ready to go. If you have any gaps, if you have any hurdles or headwinds that you didn't anticipate, you can still hit your financial targets because you've done that pre-work. Some of the hard results that I've seen in past successes as I've come to different organizations and we've implemented this. We took an organization that was single-digit growth. After we did long-range planning and connected all those things, we ended up seeing greater than 20% year-over-year sales. Putting together cost productivity initiatives, once you do the forward planning and connecting everything, you're able to get greater than, we had greater than $10 million in cost productivity 1 year. And doing those things, your EBITDA is going to go up. And so, in past results, we've seen EBITDA rates go up by, higher than 500 basis points. So great results can come of this, out of that proactive planning, making sure your strategy, your financial numbers, and your operations are all connected. And FP&A is what powers and enables that through that sort of connector role.
Amazing. Thank you, Garrett. That was super insightful. I love how you talked about retail as detailing. You even said a declining business is a chance to learn. So I love how you said that. You said, hey, it's almost like, hey, you started with the analyst, the influencer, the storyteller, the interpreter. Now it's like, hey, now that I've got all that under my belt, I can be a connector within the organization. And I love how you said, hey, I'm going to start much earlier, but you're going to actually save time. And I was actually super intrigued by health season or hell weeks are actually much easier. So that's congratulations to you on reducing that. And I love your controllable versus non-controllable. Really, that's great business partnership to say, look, here's where we need you to focus, do a great job there, and we'll take care of all the other stuff that's non-controllable. And last but not least, look at the results, right? Fantastic top line and bottom line results. So again, true value added to be that connector. And it's one of the only functions that actually has the ability to do that. So Garrett, thank you very much. I think that was a super insightful presentation. Okay, so audience members, we're now going to go to our second poll. Really appreciate you voting for the first one. And you'll see the poll launch. So what is the biggest barrier to team synergy? Is it internal competitiveness? Is it different mindsets? Is it poor listening and communication skills? Is it knowledge deficits? Or is the lack of alignment around goals? So once again, what is the biggest barrier to team synergy? Internal competitiveness, different mindsets, poor listening and communication, knowledge deficits, and a lack of alignment around goals. So thank you everybody for voting. I'll let it go for a few more seconds. Perfect, thank you. Okay, excellent. Seems like it's settling, and I'm going to close the poll and share the results. And Garrett, I would love your thoughts on what you're seeing. So what is the biggest barrier to team synergy? Only 4% said internal competitiveness, 17% said different mindsets, 19% said poor listening and communication skills, 18 said knowledge deficits, and by far the biggest one is a lack of alignment around goals, 42%. So Garrett, what are your thoughts on the results?
Yeah, no surprise there to me, Ron. My answer would have been that last one as well, a lack of alignment around goals. You know, the key term actually when we talk about long range planning and in the connector role is integration. So integrated long range planning is what's key, and that's where that connector role, and it's not just connecting the strategy, the financials, and the operations. You're also connecting the different functions that are planning all of it together and making sure that they're all on the same page. So, you know, no surprise with this poll for sure.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Garrett. And I think it links really closely with your presentation. Okay, I'm going to invite my panelists back on. And what we're going to do now is we're going to have a quick discussion. So I'm going to start with Tiffany. So what can FP&A individuals do to become the trusted connector within their organizations?
I think you really have to explore all the different roles in FP&A trends. Like, you can't just be content being a data scientist. You have to be willing to stretch yourself into all the other roles. And I think the biggest part is, if you really want to become the trusted connector, nothing is outside your job. You can't say, oh, that's not my job, or nothing is above your pay grade. Like, because to be the connector, you have to have your hands everywhere. You have to be involved in everything. So I think if you really want to be the connector for your organization, you have to strive to really learn all the different roles that are involved.
Natasha, what do you think?
Yeah, I think to be the trusted connector, I think to me that's about building relationships within the different departments within your organization that you're dealing with, understanding their role, understand the challenges that they go through, why they're doing what they're doing, what their goals are and mission. And I think that's how you get to you know, being the trusted connector. It's all about relationships.
Absolutely. No, love your comments. And I think, you know, as Tiffany said, it's not my job is not the lingo of the new FP&A team, right? And really relationship building, I think it connects Garrett's presentation really well to say, in order to be that trusted connector, you have to understand the business at many different levels. And that's starting to get into that data scientist as well. Okay, fantastic. Thank you, panel. I will invite you back for the Q&A session. And now what we're going to do is we're going to turn it over to Tiffany. So Tiffany, really excited about your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ron. When I was first asked to speak, I'll be honest, I really struggled finding my voice. I struggled with finding something to say that I felt would cover everyone at whatever stage they were in their FP&A journey. But I realized finally that everyone is in a different place in their FP&A journey, and that's okay. And it's important to realize that one shoe does not fit all. I think we can all agree that where we started in our journey is very different from where we are now. My journey is 18 years in the making. Well, almost 18 years. It is technically, as of today, 17 years, 11 months, and 9 days. And I'm at a very different place in my FP&A journey, my career, and my life than I was almost 18 years ago. The only constant that has been my friend this time has been change. Throughout the years, my role in the FP&A team has changed, and it has changed, and it has changed many, many times over the years. I think it's important to realize the 5 key roles can shift and change over time. Just like your actual forecast and budgeting shifts and changes over time, so can your 5 key roles and who holds them. In my company, we started forecasting and budgeting, like many companies do, in a spreadsheet. Over time, our spreadsheet grew arms and legs and became very complex and complicated. And just like that spreadsheet, the team that put together that spreadsheet grew and changed. I think we set ourselves up for failure when we do not recognize that things are going to change. We have to accept it. When we first started our journey in the previously mentioned spreadsheet, we had a team of 2 mad scientists huddled over a laptop. It was just myself and the CFO, and we were just trying to make sense of the numbers and what those numbers meant. What was the data telling us as a company? What was it telling us about our future? We very quickly realized we had a data problem. And due to that, we needed to quickly expand our team to include data scientists. Due to some infrastructure challenges we had in the very early days, we had to go out to each division or segment of the business and have them construct their own forecast for us. And then they would send it to head office and we would consolidate and revise. We had to add many data scientists. Because we had to work from a bottom-up structure, and then at the end, the CFO and myself would analyze and amend from the top down, outside the data scientist role from each division or segment, it was really just me and the CFO handling every other role. Like both Natasha and Garrett mentioned, the roles sometimes blend and bleed together. Sometimes, especially in the beginning, one person can have multiple roles or kind of have every role. And someone can certainly grow through several different roles. You may start as a data scientist and become an analyst. As time went by and our company grew, those roles had to shift and change. We got better programs, we got better systems, and we got better people running those systems. And therefore, we got better data. Having the infrastructure to support our team changed our team completely. It allowed us to plan and not just live in survival mode. For years, we were trying to piecemeal out a forecast with data that was not in a single source. We had to focus so much on the data scientist role just to survive. Without them, we would have nothing to analyze or tell people about. In changing our infrastructure, we could now focus on analyzing, on storytelling, and on influencing the business. Our focus no longer had to be so lasered in on the data gathering. We no longer needed every single division to be a data scientist for us. We could trust our system and trust the data. Now that we could trust the top level data coming to us, we were able to really narrow down areas that were more complex and complicated and really spend our time focused on those areas. We had a system, and the system worked for us for many years. For a long time, we were in a groove. We worked on the spreadsheet every month, we updated it, and we were happy with the results we were producing. But as time went by, it became obvious that we had stagnated. We had gotten complacent. As the years went by and the business changed, and we were not finding our forecasts as accurate, as we went back and compared it to actuals each year, we started seeing outages in areas that were consistently not timed. We needed to update the spreadsheet and account for new revenue streams and growing business. We started tweaking the existing spreadsheet, and every time we tweaked it, the spreadsheet grew, and it grew. And eventually we outgrew the spreadsheet. And when we outgrew our spreadsheet, we realized we needed to reassess our FP&A team. We could not move past that spreadsheet until we understood the areas of business that we were not capturing accurately. What had changed? How were we growing that was different than previous? What were we missing? That really became the key question. What were we missing? We had to stop and analyze. We needed to focus on our analysts and allow them to direct us and show us that we were missing the mark. What had changed? So on the next slide, you'll see that our analysts really became the centralization of our FP&A team. And our analysts found that we were not accurately accounting for our organic business growth. We were not accounting for the many years it takes for a branch to stand on its own. Yes, we were accounting for the expenses in the very beginning, but our branches normally take 3 full years to mature. We were not accounting for that extra 2-year tail. Once we identified what we were missing, what we needed, we had to figure out how to capture those segments and how to integrate it into our forecasting and our projections. For that, we had to lean on our architect, or in this case, our architects. It was, again, myself and the CFO who stepped into the role of architect. Now that we knew what we were missing, how do we ensure that it does not get missed in the future? And what is the best way to capture that data accurately and efficiently? We had to calculate what those yearly losses were and the gains were for each year until a branch reaches maturity, and only then could we really capture the data. Here we are, years later, and we are in a phase of completely rebuilding our FP&A team, yet again, as it should be, honestly. Every time we grow, every time we change, we need to reevaluate our team. Is our team working for the business now? Does our team work for the direction we're taking our business in the future? If the answer to either of those questions is no, you have to reevaluate. You have to reorganize. I guess my main message is don't be afraid of change. Don't feel that because your roles are the way they are now, that's the way they have to be, and they have to be that way forever. And I also want to encourage those who oversee the teams not to pigeonhole your people. Please allow your team to grow. Allow your team to change. Allow the individuals to grow and change and move throughout roles, and you will find success in the FP&A realm. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak to you today. I love that we have such an amazing space to ask questions and really push ourselves in the FP&A arena.
Thank you, Tiffany. Super insightful. So, I love how you said, hey, 17 years, 11 months, 8 days, not that you're counting, but I love how you said, look, the spreadsheet gained arms and legs. So you had to evolve. You had to look at the data scientists, and you had to bring more people in, and then the roles started bleeding together, and then you shifted to, hey, I need to focus on the analyst role. And again, what I loved about it, it was a constantly evolving journey, right? To say, hey, where are we? Where's our biggest need? And let's put the biggest focus there. And I think it connects back to what we're saying is wearing multiple hats. And I love how you said, look, it's now, how do we embrace and love change in order to continue to grow as our organization evolves? So Tiffany, really insightful. And I love that constantly evolving, changing, and reacting much faster than typically, or maybe a traditional approach. Thank you, Tiffany. Okay, I'm going to invite my panel back onto camera. And I would love, just a 30-second comment on what's one of your key takeaways coming out of this session. So Natasha, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think one of the key takeaways is just for me, evaluating where you're starting from and where you need to go. I think that's just the basic of bringing in these 5 critical roles is assessing what you're trying to answer sometimes and what you're trying to accomplish, and then building in the right people and skill sets to really fill those roles. Fantastic.
Garrett, what about you?
Completely agree with Natasha. It's really understanding your need in your organization, and some organizations have some of the strong capabilities in some of the roles already, some not, and so really just understanding where does your organization actually need those strengths.
Cool. Tiffany, what about you?
I think the main thing I learned is everyone's at a different space, everyone's at a different place, and we just need to continue to ask questions, ask the hard questions, and grow and change as we get those answers, and always look towards the future and continuing our education in the FP&A realm.
Yeah, and I love the consistency across the answers to say constantly understanding where we are and where the biggest needs are, and being able to change in mid-course, right? Whereas traditionally, I think a lot of people head down a path and stick on that path, as opposed to saying we need to be much quicker, much more agile, which came through in all your presentations. And I love that approach to say, let's embrace the the architect and the data scientist, and find ways to really get on the cutting edge. Okay, amazing. Thank you all for your key takeaways. And now we're going to move into the Q&A session. So I'm going to start with Garrett. So Garrett, we see these are highly specialized roles. How do you ensure knowledge is retained within the team if somebody quits?
I'm a big fan of job rotation. So I'll often ask for some people that might have a different role that are adjacent to some of these roles, to work on a certain project, or learn as a backup to some of these roles. And so that job rotation piece to me is key in terms of continuity across an organization, especially an FP&A organization.
Yeah, I love that. I worked for one organization where I stayed for a number of years, and it was because of that rotation. And I think that's a tremendous benefit that comes out of it, saying, hey, I'm going to learn different skill sets and wear different hats. And then your risk from a continuity perspective is much lower. Fantastic. Okay, so Natasha, I'm going to go to you next, right? So you're a CFO of a startup. So if you are hired to set up an FP&A team, where would you start?
Oh, that's a really good question. You know, if you had to start a brand new team, you have clean slate. You know, obviously it would depend on what systems and access to information that you have. If not, I think what goes hand in hand with that is an investment within some of our tools and systems. But assuming that's already set up, I would start building the team around some of the core roles, specifically around the analyst. I would go lighter on the storytelling and influencing right at, you know, at this moment. I would focus on the data and making sure that you're extracting the right data and you have access to the right information. And then once you start to see that come through a little bit, building in the skill sets around the influencer or the storyteller and the connector, I think will be important. I think once you have a good base.
Yeah, I like that, starting with the foundational roles and then building on top of that, right? Which kind of aligns to what Garrett's presentation was. Tiffany, anything you'd want to add to that particular question if you had a blank slate?
I think I would really focus on the architect and data scientist roles. As we've all said, it doesn't matter how great your team is if you have bad data or you don't have data. And it doesn't matter how great your data is or your team is if you can't merge them together or link them together.
100%. Really investing in that data piece first and then building on it. Very connected to Natasha's answer. Okay, Tiffany, I'm going to go to you next. So you speak of how a person can occupy multiple roles. What advice would you give to a person who occupies multiple roles and is new in their position? Is it better to train their skills or potentially hire someone else to complement their strengths and weaknesses?
This is a very good question, and it's that fine line you have to walk, because yes, you're always going to have to, especially if you're the lead on the team, have a little bit of your hands in each of the roles, but you also want to prevent yourself from burnout, and that is very real. And if you are taking on every role and you're not hiring for support, it's going to eventually burn out and crash. And so I think what you have to do is, yes, hone your skills, but at the same time, start setting up for future and start hiring people, as Natasha had said wonderfully, universities, colleges, interns. You know, you can really get some amazing skill and help from these places to assist you. But I think in the beginning, a lot of times we do carry every role in the beginning, but you do have to hire out, but you can kind of find what role fits you best. What role are you best in right now and really hone those skills? Or maybe take the opposite approach and what are you struggling in? When you're trying to do this, what's your real struggle? And either hire someone for that role would be my.
Yeah, no, I like that. And you're saying, look, it's about being fluid. And earlier in the webinar, you said, hey, it's not my role, is not the lingo of a new FP&A team. It's about being able to be flexible and move across teams. And I love your reference to, hey, we don't want to burn out this one element of the team. Let's share that, approach in order to succeed as a team. Okay, thank you, Tiffany. So Natasha, this question was addressed directly to you. So the FP&A roles, do you see these different people, or is it each FP&A role should be multi-skilled and able to do all types of the 5 roles?
Yeah, and you know, I think we alluded to this earlier. Each of those 5 different roles are not necessarily an individual, right? I think, you know, in light of, you know, resources being very limited, the amount of people that we can hire are only so much. We need to be very crafty in terms of the skill sets that each person has. You know, when I'm hiring in, I'm looking for those technical skills. I'm looking for, you know, the fact that they've worked in different systems before and can navigate data. But then I'm also looking at how they're communicating, right, in the interview and how they're telling their story as well, because that gives me a good sense of, you know, how they would be able to play some of those roles within the real life world, right? So, yeah, it's not individual roles. It equals, you know, each person. I think it's very much one person playing many of those different roles.
Yeah, I know, and I almost see like the CFO of the future having to play all those roles, right? And being able to flex into different areas. And I think that's where, the traditional CFO command and control approach is very different than now, where you've got to have your understanding in many different pods. You got to understand, how is Chat GPT, for example, going to change my life, if anything, right? So I love that answer to say that we have to be able to be flexible. And I love how you said, look, I'm going to look for the storytelling muscle with another muscle. So thank you for that. I think that's awesome. Okay, Garrett, this question is definitely directed at you. And I love the question. What is the factor that allows you to get to a 1 week budget? I think everybody's excited by that. Is it done by AI? So tell us your secret.
Yeah, no, it's got nothing to do with AI. It's really about doing the upfront work in the planning phase, and you're doing planning over several different months. You're spreading it out. It's not your everyday, but it's spread out over several months ahead of time. You did that work on the planning, and if you did the right work on the planning, then all the work that goes into the budget is already done. So it's really just about consolidating the numbers. Consolidating the numbers only takes a couple days, and then you tweak it a little bit based on what you're seeing. But that you're essentially doing all the hard work up front, spread across several months.
Yeah, no, I love that answer of that proactive planning. And I actually worked for an organization that had a very disciplined monthly process called, integrated business planning. And when I got to the budget, it was way less eventful than having that massive, activities right at the end. So I think that planful approach, proactive, you can get there in a much more efficient way. And I love how you even showed how it delivered fantastic results. Okay, I think we'll take one more question. So I'm going to start with, so how are data scientists using AI, and what tools are most helpful in this very fast changing technology? So Natasha, maybe I'll start with you if there's anything there that you come across. I know this is a pretty open question, and we'll see if anyone else has an answer.
Yeah, and I'm interested in actually Tiffany's response to this, just as you asked that. But, within FP&A and the companies that I've worked for, I haven't specifically hired for a data scientist within FP&A. As a leadership team, we've hired data scientists within the commercial operations area within the company, which is interesting because it doesn't matter if it's in FP&A or a different function. The importance is that it's there. We are still quite nascent. We hired in some data scientists. I've yet to see some of the tools and data that they're extracting out. How we're using them is mainly around the data, the sales data that we're going out to certain doctors from our sales team within life sciences, and how do we actually make those calls actually more efficient and more worthwhile to us, right? In the days of, they all used to be face to face, now they're virtual, and so using AI and these type of functions will help us understand that a little bit better. So we're still in the beginning of that.
Okay, cool. And what we'll do is we'll actually send a written answer to that just in the interest of time. So I'm also excited about Tiffany's response, but we'll get an answer after the webinar. Okay, thank you, panel. Really excited. I want to share a couple more slides before we conclude, right? So we'll share this. This is the FP&A maturity model. It's actually pretty cool where you can actually test your specific organization on a number of dimensions and score yourself to say, hey, where do we need to focus? And I think it connects really well with what we've been talking about of understanding where you are in order to move forward. I love this quote: success comes to those who never stop sharpening their skills. And these three leaders who presented here, very obvious that they do that. So you'll see the full paper here, Intelligent Transformation with FP&A Trends Maturity Model, that again is really helping us be at the forefront of our businesses. Once again, I want to thank board, reach your goals and drive digital transformation across your organization. And last but not least, stay connected with us, whether it's on LinkedIn, YouTube, X, not Twitter anymore, but really love the insights from the panel. Thank you once again. And I look forward to our journey as an FP&A industry, really being at the table and helping us move our business forward. So thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for spending the time with us.